Good morning, everyone, and welcome back for day 2 of Marketing Success Season 2024. Yesterday, we looked at some brand new Mailchimp features, including AI-powered customer journeys and the new Canva integration, and looked ahead at new technologies and upcoming trends marketers need to know. And our Science of Loyalty panel was filled with a number of great discussions and tips to help you enhance your loyalty programs. We're excited to keep the momentum going today with even more insight and practical sessions to help you succeed this holiday season. So we're going to kick off day 2 with a keynote from best-selling author and marketing advisor Robert Rose. Robert is going to discuss one of the most important aspects of creating effective marketing, personalization and the impact it can have on ROI. And before I turn things over to him, I want to remind you that we will have a Q&A session at the end of the presentation. That means you can drop your questions in the Q&A panel of the chat window at any time, and we'll get to as many as possible. And now, without further ado, I'll turn the floor over to you, Robert.
Hello and welcome. I want to personally thank you for attending, and I'm so hopeful that this is going to be helpful for your work as you look for the upcoming holiday season and beyond in all of your marketing endeavors. It's kind of an unspoken secret that, the last year or so, it's been a little challenging for those in marketing, especially those in marketing and technology, and even more broadly, smaller and medium-sized businesses. So what I do is I spend my time working with businesses of all size, and I work as a fractional marketing leader for those companies. And I can tell you, one of the things that I'm most grateful for is the front row seat that I get into so many different kinds of businesses. I get to learn about them every single day of my career. And if there's one thing I know to be true about modern marketing today, well, the current economy and what's building value is that the more personal, the more relevant, and the more relationships we can build with our customers, the better off we're going to be. So, well, let's talk about exactly that. So when you think of it, what is the overall focus of marketing? I mean, why do we do it? Well, we do it, of course, to make people aware of what we have to offer and hopefully convince them that what we have to offer will be valuable to solving a need or want that they have. So it's a 2-step process. Reach a targeted group of people and make them aware of what we have to offer and do it frequently enough so that they ultimately are persuaded enough to purchase our product and service. But here's the thing. Reach, that represents value. It's the opportunity we have for our message to have its desired impact. But frequency, that's the opportunity cost. The more times we have to reach someone to get them to do the thing we want them to do, well, the more it costs. If I got to call somebody multiple times, it costs more. If I have to hit them with more ads, it costs more. If I have to repeat myself with content across multiple channels over and over and over again, it costs more. So at the very basic calculus of marketing, reach is value and frequency equals cost. Now, you might also argue that in today's modern marketing, we also have to make sure that people are happy with their purchase, that what they'll buy other things that we offer them, that they'll stay loyal to our brand, and all that stuff that they just purchased. And you'd be right. But ultimately, that too, well, that comes back to reaching people. In this case, it's our customers, the ones we know a little better, with just the right frequency, just enough so that they'll remain satisfied, will become aware of other things that we do, or will talk favorably about us to their friends and family. So it's ultimately a two-step process. Reach a group of people and reach them at the most optimal interval and do it infrequently enough to manage our costs. Or, as the marketing mantra that I've come to know since I first got into marketing 30 years ago, our objective as marketers is to deliver the right message to the right person at the right time. So how do we think about doing that? Well, welcome to trying to hit the bullseye. It's one of, if not the, most important and also impossible things that we want to achieve as marketers. So what we want to do is deliver that perfect message to the exact right person at the exact right time, right? Bullseye. But of course, the customer, they don't know. It's not as if they asked for it, right? And now is the time when I need that most compelling marketing message, said nobody ever. So what we hope for is that the exact right person, message, and timing, one where the customer welcomes the message as one that's just for them. In a word, personal. Every marketer's dream is that we don't come across as that car sales guy trying to add floor mats and undercoating to your product, but rather we come across like an old friend, telling you about something that you should know about because, well, I know it will be valuable to you. It's a little like, when you hear that voiceover in the movie trailer, this time it's personal. I mean, whenever you hear that in the movie theater, you know the hero is going to take action in a way that is way more emotional. It's personal. The way that they normally do. The action is going to be heightened. Or think about it like this. So my wife and I, we've been going to this little Italian restaurant down the road from our house for years. If we make a reservation for 4, when we walk in, the owner, he's huge. I mean, he gets this huge greeting, knowing that we have some kind of guests in town or guests that we're bringing to dinner. He makes a big deal out of greeting us, pretends that I'm some sort of expert in wine, but he's got a glass of my favorite Prosecco waiting for all of us to have a little taste of what's coming in and welcome to. But if our reservation is for 2, we might not even see the owner for a while. The host will seat us at a table in the back, quiet. And then our favorite glass of wine, just waiting there, waiting for us. And he'll come over quietly later and say, hey, how are things? What's going on? And if for some reason it's a surprise and we're with a family or there are kids involved, he again makes a huge deal out of this. He entertains us for a few minutes as the staff adds a paper cloth and basically crayons and gets everything ready for those kids. That's personal. And it's obviously one of the things that keeps us introducing new people to this restaurant, as well as coming back for the last 10 years. But it's not necessarily personalized. How do I know? Well, for one, when he comes over to us when we're a couple, he never remembers my job or my favorite food or even that we were there a month ago. He doesn't memorize data, and he doesn't throw it in my face. He doesn't have to. And 2, I know, because I've watched him on occasion do the exact same thing to another couple. So that's what I'd really like to talk to you about today. Personalization with our marketing, our content, and how to make it actually work. And let's start with our first part here, which is actually understanding the difference between personalized and the personal when it comes to digital and content and marketing. So, okay, if you're relatively new to marketing, you should know that marketers have been talking about how to do personalization for I've been trying to think about it for 20 years. Everybody's been trying to think about it for 2 decades. I mean, it's the sexiest thing that most companies never attempt. Big or small, by the way. Small and medium-sized companies, they think it's something only the big companies can do. But I can tell you that big companies, having worked with them, they might struggle with it even more because they think it's something that only smaller companies can do because it's just so hard to wrangle all the technology and the teams to have to make it all work together to make it happen. In fact, 2 years ago, there was a very interesting article in Marketing Week. It basically said, we should just give up. The author said, the real personalization, it's unachievable due to poor data quality and all of that. But even if we could do it, they said, even if we could, it should probably be replaced with content and creative that just resonates with everybody. Now, you yourself, you might have kind of rolled your eyes a little bit when you saw the title of this session and went, okay, here we go again. Another presentation where it'll be all kinds of stats about personalization results, 250% increase in email subscribers, a 35% growth in average order value, 80% of buyers say that personalization makes me feel like the company cares, blah, 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 blah. And then that same pundit might show slides of Netflix and Amazon and Walmart and go, wow, they're amazing, personalization. And you go, we're not Netflix. No. We're definitely not Netflix. None of us are. And by the way, let's look at Netflix and Amazon and Walmart. How many times have you seen personalized content on Amazon and went, yeah, thanks Amazon for suggesting that product to me again that I literally just purchased as a gift for my niece yesterday. Anyway, all those stats, by the way, that I just threw out there, they're all true, by the way. They come from real research. It works. But here's another stat that is also true. 80% of marketers who have invested in personalization abandon their efforts because it's just too darn hard. Welcome to the paradox of personalization capabilities. Everybody tells us it's amazing, and it probably is, but it's also so hard and so expensive, you'll never do it. So let's not talk about how important personalization is. Let's talk about why and how we mere mortal companies can actually use technology and creativity to get much more personal with our content and our marketing targeting, so that we actually can have a better shot at delivering the right message at the right time and actually make the idea of personalization work. All right, so let's go back to our restaurant owner for a moment here. And let's talk about a bridge between something that is personal and what the common idea of personalization is. I kind of like to call it personaization. In other words, targeting content based on the specific and common intents or values that are common to my customer and my experience, not on somebody's individual data. In other words, the restaurant owner, he doesn't need to know my job or my age or my income levels to know what my intent is when I come into that specific restaurant. That customer, me, just wants an awesome restaurant experience that's personal. You see, you might have thought, as I did, that the only reason that the owner can actually do what he does is because he's been around so long, he's old, he gets to know a small number of customers, therefore he can remember everybody. And you might think, in just the opposite way of the Netflix or Amazon example, that they can do it because they got so much data about us, and it's because they're so big and the restaurant owner is so small, that they can actually have that capability to personalize. But yeah, again, we aren't Netflix or Amazon, but we're also not a local restaurant either. How do you scale this? How do you have all the data you need, but also all the insight into the details of your customer for an e-commerce business or for any kind of company that has hundreds, thousands, even millions of customers who need content personalized because of all those stats that we saw? But see, that's also the wrong way to think about this. You see, successful personalization is not necessarily about the individual details, all the data that make up the thousands of different ways that content might be presented to an individual customer. No, it's about understanding the intent behind a small number of journeys that you choose to make more personal and understanding how to make each of those personal that are right for your business. Let me say it like this. So yeah, there's a small amount of data that the restaurant owner probably has at his disposal. Remember, the only real data that he has to remember or have in his CRM database, which for him, by the way, I'm quite sure is a big book, is what 2 means in my world, spouse versus friend versus family, and what 3 or 4 typically means, family, friends, etc. And maybe my favorite wine if he actually tracks that. The Prosecco, by the way, he brings out, if we're more than one, no one, including me, remembers if he brings out my favorite. It's whatever he's got on hand. No one, including me, cares. Put really simply, the owner has a small number of plays that he can choose from for different kinds of customers. The goal isn't to get the mass details right for the thousands of different plays, my first name, my age, how much I typically spend, my favorite meal. It's to get the detail for a small number of plays that really help the experience feel more personal. I mean, he could even get the wine wrong. But if he did, everything else would still create a more memorable experience than his competitor, and that's how to succeed with personalization or personaization at a scale that's bigger than the local restaurant. We got to plan and coordinate a small number of plays that help us understand the intent of different types of our customers and how we might deliver a more personal experience at one or multiple interactions with our marketing content. So, okay, well, the good news is we do have technology to help us accomplish this. In fact, here we are. I mean, look, this is amazing, right? Here we are. Thanks to our host for giving us exactly that. But it's funny, in so many ways, there are other technologies out there, all in their effort to get us to appreciate their sophistication, that they've inadvertently been one of the biggest obstacles to actually accomplishing getting too personal. These companies want it to feel so difficult and so data intensive because it makes their tool look so much more sophisticated. But it comes back to that paradox. If you ask your customers, would you like targeted, relevant advertising and content to help you during your buying process? Customers will go, well, yeah, exactly, sure, I'll take that, absolutely. But then ask them if you should actually use their personal data to do it, and they'll say, hell no. So think about that for a minute. The best digital content experiences, they're not conspicuously personalized. Instead, they're personal, relevant, and welcome. They just are. They are experiences that feel like they're just for you, without overtly making you think that they are. If any of you are on TikTok, I know some of you are, you've probably felt this. The algorithm slowly personalizes the feed for you, but it doesn't tell you that it's doing that. It doesn't tell you that it's optimized. It just is. The problem isn't that affordable technology can actually help us do this. It's how much of the technology we utilize that doesn't actually help us make the creative leap to create the small number of plays that we want to use to provide different kinds of experiences. In other words, think about it like this. Most techniques for data and content personalization, the popular sort of kind, point out that, well, we should use collected data to parrot back what we've learned about a customer. It's kind of, I like to call it the Mad Libs type of personalization. And for example, you might say, hello, Robert, you've purchased these products. Therefore, you might want to learn about this concept. It's like this headstone, right? Parroting back what I know about my first name here goes, they know where I am. But then, because the data is inaccurate or incomplete or in some way doesn't quite fit the context of what's going on, it just kind of inserts it. And you're left going, what the hell are they even trying to say? Think about what you're trying to do with personalization. You're trying to deliver the right message to the right person at the right time. And what we end up doing is delivering what we think we know to a message to a previous person at some random time. The challenge isn't that the customer data, your customer data, is bad. Most organizations, big or small, we can identify people, we can collect accurate information about them. It isn't in dynamically assembling the content. Technology can help us do exactly that. The problem lies in doing this is that it requires an enormity of content and data to address every possible combination of messaging to individuals and when and where and how to deliver it. And hence, the reason that so many marketers give up on it. So let's walk through a process for how you can start to think about getting to better personal content and use technology to help you do exactly that. And that brings us to part 2 of this, and that is a process for steps you can take to start to think about a more personalized content approach. Now, we're going to break this into 5 steps. Now, I'm doing this quickly for time. I don't want you to think that or believe that these 5 steps are something you could do during like a coffee break or something. Each one is, it's kind of a thing. And they are not equal in weight. I mean, you might want to do something really small, or you might want to do something really big. But these are the steps that maybe could be a pragmatic way for you to start thinking about how you might layer in a personalized approach to your overall content and marketing strategy. So the 5 steps are: define your plays, the content, experiences that you want to start with. Spoiler alert, don't start with a whole bunch. I mean, just start with 1 or 2. You have to make every experience personalized. you don't have to do it everywhere you want to do it. Maybe start with just your email newsletter, or your drip campaign, or something that's emails for selling, sales enablement. It's a very common one, by the way. And the good news is, Mailchimp, our wonderful host here, well, it's the tool that I use anyway, and it makes this quite straightforward and easy to understand. But you might also work on things like your blog, or your resource center, or even your customer service help center. Then outline differences within the plays that you want to run. In other words, you got to write the rules of what happens. If this, then that. What happens if we don't know versus when we do know? This is knowing what happens in the play if 2 people, for example, make a reservation versus 4 people make a reservation. It helps us get ready to execute the play. Well, then, defining the insight. In other words, what do we need to know that helps us know which rule to execute the best play? These are the triggers. But also, there may be combinations that give us different insight. Imagine a data field that, for example, helps us understand whether the reservation for 4 is actually a family with kids or a business dinner with colleagues. So we're going to walk through the different ways to think about the data that you're gathering. Then choose a technology tool that will help you access this data and present the content in a way that you like. Remember, the data may come from a completely different platform than what is actually managing the digital content experience. For example, you may be using the data and insight from your email system in order to display the right webinar page for the resource center that access to it. And finally, as I mentioned in the beginning, start small and build your complete program of plays, your playbook, over time. This is a process that you can repeat, by the way. Just because you do it well doesn't mean, by the way, it's guaranteed to work. Like everything in marketing, you're going to try it out. Just because one thing makes it more personal, maybe it won't affect the conversion rate or the engagement rate. So do lots of small things rather than fewer big things. Learn over time. All right, let's get into each one of these so that we can walk through it. So the first thing that we want to do is define and document the playbook that we're going to use for whatever personal experience we're trying to create. That's just basically a fancy way of saying, let's look at the entirety of our customer's journey, that you can see here, by the way, represented on the right-hand side of the screen, and see where we want to actually start our efforts, right? So this is the way I like to look at the customer's journey. It's sort of a modern figure 8, sort of infinity loop, if you will. And if you look in the lower left, well, you've got discover, which is the discovery or awareness of our product or solution, and then maybe personalization. It's not the right spot for you. Maybe it is, but maybe it's not. Maybe you want to personalize your website, or you want to get a personalized blog or something like that. More likely is that you want to make content a little more personal deeper into the journey. Maybe here in the learn stage, where people are learning about your particular product or your service, that they're subscribing to an email newsletter that you may be helping them understand a concept. Or they're trying it out in a demo. Maybe you make a product demo page and you want to make that a little more personal. Or you want to make the idea of kinds of specific solutions that they're looking at as they compare you to your competitors. Maybe you want to make yourself look a little different or a little more personal. Then, of course, there's transactions, which are, when somebody actually purchased something that you make, subscribes, donates, votes, whatever it may be that your particular transaction may be. Then we move into the sort of loyalty and upsell and cross-sell parts of the organization where we see and use the actual product and service. This may be where you want to put in targeted personal customer help documentation, or adopt, where they're pulling this loyalty into service into their lifestyle, or where they're, by the way, coming all the way back around, returning back to buy more from you, resubscribe, donate again, vote again, whatever the chance may be as they come back around and go through the purchase journey all over again. So the question we have to ask, once we start to look at this journey, is where do we want to start? Which experience do we want to have today, or what do we want to build tomorrow? Do we want to make it more personal? Now, the rule of thumb here, and it's just that, a rule of thumb, is that the deeper in the journey, in other words, you start at the surface with discover and go deeper with learn and try and transact and use, etc. The deeper you go, the more data you typically want and need in order to make it personal. And that makes sense, right? I mean, it's because you're getting more of that one-to-one relationship as you get more and more intimate with that relationship as the customer goes through their journey. So who is that customer at that particular part of the journey? We need to understand that. Who is the persona? Now, I'm sure you've seen books, you've seen papers, you've seen all kinds of educational materials on how to develop your persona, or avatars they're sometimes called. But this is your customer, knowing your customer for whom you want to create this more personal experience. What's the common intent? What's the common value? What's the thing that would add value to that experience if we look at it, by the way, from our restaurant perspective again? It's the fact that they know that my intent, if I'm coming in with a big group, is to make a big deal out of it and make me feel great. And when I'm with my partner, it's about making us feel special and catered to. What is it in your particular customer's case? Document it, get it, understand it at that particular stage. Who is that customer and what do you want to create for them? Third, okay, what's the play? What should happen? What should be the outcome? There's going to be more than one play ultimately over time, but maybe you're only working on one now. Maybe it's your email drip campaign. Maybe it needs to be targeted to a very specific and segmented set of users to make it more personal for them and what they may want, or where they live, or the time that they want to get it, or whatever it may be. That makes it the right message to that right person at the right time. So what is that play? What should actually happen in that particular case? I'm going to give you a very simple, straightforward example of this. So you may have an email that goes out to like all the people who attended your digital, online, or physical event, right? But of course, more people registered than actually attended. I do this all the time. So one of the things I like to do is I capture what actually happened. In other words, did they attend or did they not attend? And if they did attend, well, then they get a piece of messaging in an email that says, hey, we know and we're sorry to have missed you at our wonderful event, and it was really great. Here's some of the things that you missed. By the way, here's some things that might be personalized by other pieces of things that I know about you, your industry that you did in your registration form, et cetera. In other words, what industry are they in, or what title they might actually have? Are they a VP or a director? And then here's also the way you get the on-demand version of the event because you missed it. You can come to our website, you can log in, you can watch the webinar, whatever it was. And the second email, by the way, is those who goes to and didn't attend, or did attend rather, and you say, hey, thank you so much for attending. We're glad you took the time out of your day to actually attend our event. We really appreciate it. Oh, and by the way, if you want to talk with someone, here's the next step. A very simple and straightforward example of being able to target a persona, eyes-based thing, persona-ized, based on what insight we might have in a play that we might want to run off of that. Okay, that brings us to step 2, which is actually, okay, now that we know the plays, what are the rules of the actual play? In other words, what are the trigger points to actually initiate a particular play and how it actually gets executed? So the first thing we want to do here is to start to think about, all right, where are all of the different options that may happen? In other words, when the person shows up, we have to know basically, okay, did they really come with 2 people, or did they come with 4 people, or did they actually come with 6 people, or whatever the case may actually be? We have to map out the key actions or data points, the flow of what's going to happen. When something happens, what's the trigger that's going to initiate the play? Is it a page visit? Is it a click on an email? Is it putting in certain data attributes with certain levels of specifics? Do they tell us a preference, or do we get it from their behavior? And then once we start to define those sorts of areas, when something happens, when is that trigger? Then what we can do is we can create and write out a rule for each trigger. In other words, which play or what part of a play will get executed, and align that to the communication of whatever personal piece of communication we want to happen. And we can identify that content because it'll obviously need to be created so that we can be presented either, simultaneously in real time, or maybe asynchronously. I mean, sometimes a year later. Let's go back to our email example for a moment. So when we attended that event or didn't attend that event, we needed to create both versions of that email independent of each other, based on the fact that we know that there are going to be some people who attend and some people who don't attend. So the rule is then attend or didn't attend. What happened? Well, if you attend, you get this email. If you don't attend, you get that email. If you don't attend, you get this email with the other block of content in there based on your industry or your interest or other kinds of things that we have about you that we'd like to send to you. And if you did attend, here's a thank you and a follow-up that basically says, hey, you're ready to take the next step to talk to a salesperson or someone about this particular event or what it might mean for your organization. Well, we're putting that in that specific call to action for this particular case. Those are the rules. Write out the rules. Who's going to need what to happen? And identify the things that will need to be created for each of those divergent ways that the play might get executed. That gets us to step number 3. So, okay, step number 3, a little more complex, because now we're actually starting to talk about what insight do we need to understand before we pick a rule or before a rule is chosen. In other words, what needs to happen for us in order to actually execute a play we want to execute? We have to define the insight we need to get, the data, the specific data that we need to know what to trigger any of those actions. Now, just a concept here, just a concept, I want you to be familiar with it, is the different kinds of data and what they can provide. The reason that this is important is because as we start to categorize this data, there's just so much, I mean, even as a small business, even if you're a solopreneur, there is so much data we have at our fingertips, and it's all going to come from different kinds of systems. So you need a way to start to categorize the amounts of data that you're going to need in different categories. So let's quickly, I just want to talk about these 3 major categories of data first, before we talk about what we do with them. So the first idea here is explicit data. Now, this is the easiest one to understand because this is the data you ask for directly, right? It's what we think of. Explicit data are preferences or things that people explicitly tell us that help us develop deeper, more trusting relationships with our customers. Remember the classic Seinfeld episode? I may be dating myself here. Kramer is pretending to be the movie phone service, and at some point he realizes that he can't understand what the telephone tone preferences are. So he just, why don't you just tell me the name of the movie that you'd like to see? That's explicit data. The great example of this is when a marketer asks for a customer's name or a job title or an email address in exchange, maybe for the download of a white paper or a free trial or something like that. The key is that if you're asking for explicit data, you gotta know why. Because you're now setting an expectation for a deeper level of trust and intimacy with that customer. So do you see how you might want to demonstrate other value before you start asking explicitly for it? So when you're thinking about asking for an explicit piece of data, what I like to do is this. Pretend you're sitting on a park bench with your customer, and they say, why do you want my email address? What would you say to them? If you feel pretty good about answering, it's a pretty good chance that you can actually ask for it. If you don't, you might want to think about it. That brings us to the second, which is actually implicit data. Now, implicit data is the behavioral insights that you observe indirectly. In other words, implicit data helps you develop empathy for the customer and develop and determine what their actual intent might be so that you can know when or if you want to start communicating to them in a specific way. A great example of this is watching the behavior of a customer over time to know that they've consumed perhaps maybe 5 particular pieces of content. Then based on that context, that behavior, we can infer their intention. Maybe they watched a best practices or implementation webinar, and they watched a how-to use this product, or read an ebook, or watched an advanced use cases video. We can start to infer intent on that based on that implicit behavioral data, and maybe optimize discounts on the product or other things that type to persuade a sale. Why? Because we can see now is the time to ask, to deliver that right message in the right time. Implicit data is how we can demonstrate empathy because we understand just by them doing them, that's what they're trying to do. We can either understand the customer's intentions or we can respond accordingly. And in many ways, this is way more powerful than actually asking them for the explicit data because it's watching what they do and reacting accordingly instead of what they said maybe. That brings us to the third, and that's ambient data. Ambient data is what gives you the context or situational awareness of the needs in the right time. Now, think of it like this. So it's the at the right time part of the context of the message delivery. This data might be your own data or categorizations, your meta tags, for example. It might be that you, for example, describe the content or the audience being identified. For example, you might tag some of your content with different categories or your personas or products to begin to contextualize which of your products your customer might be most interested in. Or this data might be gleaned from some third-party source to contextualize a visitor. I'll give you an example of this. So local weather data can be used to optimize a website for those that are coming in from a warm, sunny climate versus those coming from a wintry location so that you can actually market umbrellas or snowshoes to people where it's raining or snowing versus beach chairs and sun umbrellas where it might actually be sunny and hot. So that's the kind of thing we can do. What we need to do here is identify what insight is going to be needed to initiate these plays from these categories. Identify just the minimal amount of data and the type of data that would be needed in order to provide the insight or display a different kind of content based on that trigger or the rule that you've set up. Now, in my previous example with the webinar attendees, we need a couple, right? We need to know the data, whether they're attending or not. We also need to know their email address, obviously. We also need to know basically what industry they're in if we want to personalize that one content block that we need to know where they and when they attended and did or didn't attend the webinar in terms of what they did. Those data points are needed in order to deliver the rules based on the play that we've constructed. Now we can ask, where is this going to come from and where are we going to acquire it? Well, the attendee versus non-attendee, maybe it comes from Zoom or whatever our webinar tool is or whatever it is we actually use to deliver the actual webinar or digital event. The other, the industry information or the email, well, it probably comes from the registration through our Mailchimp integration, for example, where we're going to create a landing page that captures that information for the event registration itself. And finally, what we want to do is understand and document how will this integrate into the overall experience. In other words, how are we going to start to store and capture that data so that it can actually automatically or manually be initiated to that experience in this case? Pulling it all together into one tool so that we can actually utilize it, use it to display the right kind of content that we need to actually display. Let me give you a final example of this, sort of how it all comes together in step 3. So let's say, for example, and this is a real-life example, by the way. So a hotel offers me my preferences, free Wi-Fi or free breakfast as my options in their loyalty program. I select free Wi-Fi for my profile. That's explicit data. They know I want free Wi-Fi. I've given my preference. But over time, what happens is, and maybe you're like this too, I pretty much always select when I'm in a hotel room the fast, super fast Wi-Fi option in my hotel, right? I don't know why, I'm probably fake, but anyway, it's the super fast Wi-Fi. I wasn't thinking about that at the time of my loyalty form fill out, and their super fast option, by the way, isn't available for loyalty members for free. Now, I might be bothered by that, I might not be bothered by that, but honestly, I'd kind of forgotten about it and even preferred it. After a couple of months of this, the hotel actually reached out proactively and said, hey, we noticed you chose super fast Wi-Fi pretty much all the time for the last few stays that you've been in, and that's not available for free with the loyalty membership. Would you prefer the free breakfast instead? That's implicit data, actually watching what I actually do, implying my intent, and overriding my explicit data. Yes, I said, and I went in and changed my preference, and I felt like I got a much more personal experience from that hotel chain. That's going to get us to step 4, which is actually now what we need to do is think about how we're actually going to implement this into our technology and what we're going to do with our tech stack, right? Tech stack. So we need actually to create a technology implementation plan and integrate this play into the actual technology and operations itself. And spoiler alert, this is where most people end up really struggling because the technology part of this, it seems really difficult. Bringing these multiple pieces together can often be really hard. So the first thing we need to do is think about where are we acquiring that data? Now, as I mentioned, it might be the web, it might be your email subscribers, it might be a conference, it might be a social media, it might be a community registration form, it might be a web registration form. Where are you actually acquiring this data? And then more importantly, where does that data go? Where does it actually go to the content expression approach? By the way, our hosts here have a really great way of actually solving that exact challenge. How will this data help us express that content? Will it be an audience, basically giving us insight, or will it be helping us trigger an automation, or is it helping us generate a very specific campaign? And that's the way to think about it. What's the one tool where we can start to centralize our audience? And it's probably one that helps us manage an audience, because everything we're talking about here are the attributes of our audience. So it is helping us tag for future reference so that we get to know and target and make this content more personal to that person down the road. Or is it doing something like registering for an event or something like that? Mailchimp's a great example of this. We can start to pull all this data together in tags, segmentation of our audiences, pull it all together and make those personal touches much more easy to do. And finally, we need to define, what does success look like? What does measurement of this look like? How are we going to measure the efficacy? Is it going to help us make faster decisions? Is it going to help us increase our digital event registration? Is it going to help us with more engagement? Is the email click going through the roof? Is it giving us more leads? Is it helping with our engagement on our website or our customer help center? So define your engagement metrics for making sure that the personal content is actually succeeding. Okay, now we've got those 4 steps, and it brings us to step 5. Which is basically bringing it all together into a small step. Now, it's the last step, but in so many ways, this last step is kind of where we're going to start. Because how do we build it up? I mean, how do we know where to begin? As I mentioned in the very beginning of this, I'd like you to think about starting small and building up over time, both the number of plays that you're going to make or the areas of the journey that you're going to start your approach with. Again, maybe just start with just your lead generation drip email campaign. Easy to do. So where do we start? Well, we have to start to say, do we even have the right insight into our audience to begin building plays and rules, etc.? So you might start with what we call an audience audit. Now, an idea of an audience audit is as follows. You probably already have an audience right now. Maybe it's your email marketing database, a newsletter database. It might be your Mailchimp database, wherever it might be. You've probably got multiple, quite honestly, but thinking about getting into one is a good idea. But you've got an audience. And hopefully you're now starting to attract a lot of data, metadata, tags, segmentation, where you can start to define where you can create those plays and actually segment them into more personal areas. What I want you to do, the very first step, is this audience audit. This is going to help you make decisions about where you can and should start. So what does an audience audit look like? Well, so it looks like all of the audiences that you have and taking those audiences and the data that you have on those audiences, but it starts with an idea of what happens when you send this group, to the whole group, a message. When you target this group, what happens? And you can see on the screen, there's sort of what we would call on one axis, the lower sort of horizontal axis there. Like you can do all the way on one side, you're apathetic on one end. Like just nothing happens, like nobody cares. No actions happen. Nothing goes on in the way that they're disinterested. And then you've got interested, and then you've got, all the way over to being an advocate. In other words, at the advocate level, if we send this group an email, every time we send this group an email, people share it, they love it, they respond, they share it with their friends, they talk about it on social media. Hopefully this describes your audience. I mean, let's be honest, probably doesn't, but let's hope it does. That's where we get to the advocate, right? So think about that spectrum. Then on the left spectrum, sort of going vertically, what percentage of your audience actually does this? 20%, 40%, 60%, 80%, 100%. So when you start to look at your audience based on performance, what do you see there? Well, you might see what we call the zone of action. Again, hopefully this is you, which is the best of all places to be, right? Where a large percentage, maybe it's not 80 or 90%, maybe it's 60 or 70%, your audience does what you want them to do. In other words, they open it, they click on it, they visit your website, whatever it is you're asking them to do. When you hit them, that's when you know you've reached the hilltop, the mountaintop, the north, whatever your favorite metaphor is, you're there. You know you've gotten to the top. But then there's the zone of passivity. And the zone of passivity is where it kind of doesn't matter, right? Sometimes, it's pretty passive audience. Sometimes we send them stuff and they do stuff, and sometimes they don't, and they just kind of sit there, and we send that email newsletter every Friday, but nothing really happens and nobody really does anything. So what we want to do is reach that target sweet spot. And then there's the zone, unfortunately, at the very low end, the zone of abandonment, which is actually not quite as bad as the zone of passiveness, but basically the zone of abandonment is where people, a very small group of people, they don't do anything, maybe they unsubscribe, they don't like you, like they're just abandoning all your messaging. And in fact, they don't like you at all, right? They're not actually reacting. This is not only a great way to sort of understand where personal content can have a big effect, but it may tell you that your audience right now is just not there. It's wrong for what it is you want to try and do. And that brings us to the conclusion. So let's bring all this together in an example. So I told you earlier about this company that I worked with, and it's the Content Marketing Institute. I've been working with them for the last 15 years or so, and it's one of the things that we do a lot to making content more personal over time. Now, you wouldn't know if you're a subscriber to Content Marketing Institute, because you can see on the screen there, you can sign up to get our email newsletters, and you get all these wonderful things, and you probably wouldn't know how much work we do behind the scenes, because we're not doing a lot of personalization, but we are doing a lot of work with making the content more personal. In other words, we don't do the kind of, hi, Robert, you are subscribed to this newsletter, and you are subscribed to that thing, and you went to this event. But you can, of course, subscribe to multiple newsletters, you can come to multiple events, and we're tracking and getting insight triggers for all of that. So on the right, you've got your first name, your last name, your email address, country that you're in, what newsletters you want to subscribe to, the daily alerts, the weekly newsletter, the event updates, the partner email, so on and so forth. All of those are giving us insight that we need to help make things better. So when we think about this, we think about it a couple of different ways, a couple of plays, if you will, that we do. First is, when you sign up, explicit data. You sign up. We wait till you do 3 things, implicit data, on our platforms before you start getting any sort of marketing emails from us. In other words, what we do is we wait till you become what we call a fan. This is what we call waiting until you become a fan in the way that we create a play. In other words, if you attend a webinar, plus you attend a physical event, all of it implicit data, well, now you've subscribed to the email newsletter. That's the third thing. Okay, explicit data, that's the third thing. Now you're going to start getting an email campaign from us saying, hey, you should probably come to this event and pay for it. You should come to buy this thing. You should come and download this research, or you should attend this thing. That's when you're going to start getting marketing-related emails from us. Till then, you're just sort of considered a visitor and an audience member and all that. That's one way we make content more personal, because we figured out if you've done 3 things, well, now you're at least engaged. Your intent is that you're a fan. Once you've reached a certain level of engagement, however, implicit data, now you've attended a few events, physically or online, digital events, all of that, you've now paid some money. Now we sort of elevate you to what we call a super fan. That's when you start getting targeted content to you saying, hey, would you like to speak at one of our events? Would you like to become part of our community? Would you like to become moderator at one of our tracks at one of our events? That's when we start reaching out with more active outreach to get and become more of the content marketing community that we ultimately are trying to build, that intimate, more personal relationship. Those are the kinds of things when we look at what happens from an implicit, what is your behavior, and explicit, what did you tell us your preferences are from your email address, your business, your country, and what emails you want to actually get from us. And an ambient data comes in where we do that based on what time of year it is. Pulling all those things together to begin to send much more personalized messaging, much more personal messaging, delivering that content to the right person at the right time. Okay, so what now? What do you do now with all of this? Well, remember, first of all, this is, an hour long, sort of, and we're just meeting here. And I know we went through this very quickly. This is a process, right? This isn't a project. This is the beginning of a new kind of way of working with your tools, not necessarily a project that you're going to be one and done with. Remember, you're never done with your audience audit. You continually do that. Once you do it the first time, you should always do it. How often? Once a quarter, twice a year, whatever's right for you. People change, the context changes, actions change. So you want to constantly review. Are we getting the right data to serve the right kind of plays that we want to play? Do we want to change our playbook? Do we want to change the rules? Remember, non-action is also an action. Not attending the event is also an action. And so you want to do is capture that implicit data, that non-event as well. One of my favorites of this, of course, is when people put stuff in their shopping cart and then, of course, don't come back to it. That non-action is telling me that there's a disinterest there or something I wasn't compelling, personal enough that did. What can I do to serve a more personal action in that moment? Now, not all the data, by the way, that you collect has to be a trigger. Sometimes it's just about insight and providing us with ambient information that we need to make decisions about context to other things that we're doing in our marketing. In other words, industry and location, that's helping me understand something really important, where I might want to have a personal focused physical event. In other words, I might say, hey, we have a lot of people in Chicago. We may want to consider doing a physical event in Chicago. So whether I'm serving content personally to you or not, based on the fact of where you live, I can actually start to deliver better experiences to you elsewhere. Remember, all the data that you collect can be used for insight and for actions to trigger more personal content. to help you deliver that right message to the right person at the right time. Because now, this time, it's personal. It's personalized. It's the right message to the right person at the right time. Or, maybe you want to think of it as rather personal. It's the right value to the right audience in their time. And that's what makes winning the race for growth possible. I thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it.
Robert, you are phenomenal. I know everyone that is attending today is so happy that they showed up. You gave so much nuance. It's brilliant, and I hope you guys enjoyed that. And I would imagine that people have questions about these distinctions. So let's see what's on people's minds. Okay, first question is, what are some suggestions for personalization when you're selling a service and not a product?
Fantastic.
That's a good one.
Yeah, fantastic question. And what I would suggest there is that there's a couple of things that we can do. I sell a service, right? I provide services. I provide professional services, consulting, some might call it. And one of the things that I look at is how am I interacting with people that are in varying parts of their journey looking to buy consulting services. Now, one of the things that's interesting is when you start thinking about services, there's services we want to buy and services we don't want to buy, right? Legal services is a good example of that, right? Nobody goes, hey, I want to go buy some legal services today, right? You know, probably not. But they might have a problem. So there's something that thrusts them into the buyer's journey, right? So I want to understand what those things are and who they are and what their emotional state is. I want to understand their intent. So very much like a product or service, or excuse me, a product in e-commerce, I want to understand how I can deliver something that's more personal to them. And in some cases, it's a highly emotional type of thing that I need to be able to deliver. So all of those best practices come to play. What's the play that I want to run when I first meet someone for the first time? If you're in a service business, let's be honest, that first phone call you have with a prospect or someone who's new to your services, wouldn't you just kill to not know exactly their emotional state, what it is they actually need, how much money they're looking to spend, are they, all of those things that will come out of developing a more trusted relationship with someone. And the way we do that is actually thinking that through and figuring out which plays we want to run. So it's honestly the exact same process, a little smaller, I would suggest, with products versus products, because products tend to be a lot of different products with a lot of different customers. So there's more plays per se. But with services, it's the exact same approach.
Yeah, that's so good, right? So guys, next question. One of you asked, how do you identify and prioritize which data has the most value to your business?
Great question. Love that question. You do so by, so one of the things that I recommended in the very early parts of this was to start small and run lots of little experiments rather than one great big giant thing. So you're going to start to learn what the real key components are, right? What the key information that data has to the value of your business. And you'll only do that by testing and doing and actually trying things out. Because sometimes it won't work, right? Sometimes, for example, when I talked about the idea of did you attend the webinar, did you not attend the webinar? One of the things that I actually learned was those who didn't attend the webinar were actually much more likely to actually respond to things. So that was a piece of data that I saw that was critical. I didn't think it was that critically important. I thought, well, they just didn't make it, right? So there's sort of two equal things. But what I found out was the ones who didn't attend were much more likely to respond to the follow-up message than the ones who did attend. So didn't attend, I almost now, it's weird, when I do webinars, I go, I kind of don't care whether they don't attend or not. I used to get all, they didn't attend my webinar, but now it's like, well, I found for my situation that the didn't attend actually respond better. And so it became one of the core elements of prioritized data that I do for all my digital event. Any digital event I do now, that is one of the core pieces of data. So it'll start to change and sort of rise to the top, like, what is it, the wheat rises to the top, or and then the milk rises, or the cream, or whatever it is, whatever metaphor you like there, rises to the top over time.
Wow, that's fascinating, right? So let's see what you guys are thinking. How do you know when you're starting to overwhelm your audience with too much personalized content?
Yeah, it's a great question too. I would just say that you could take out the word personalized there, right? When do you know when you're starting to overwhelm your audience with content? This is where an audience audit really starts to come in. Ask them. right? One of the things that we learned at CMI was we used to have, the reason that we have that choice now on the daily email versus the weekly email versus the every other day email was because we used to sort of just assume. We used to just assume, like, you're just going to get a daily email from us. And we started to hear from like proactively, they would, because they were actually doing things and our audience audit went rather well, they would tell, like, hey,
slow down.
Yeah, this is too much, right? We can't keep up, and it's too much content in my inbox from you. So then we offered a choice, and we started doing testing against that to say, hey, 3, 2 is Tuesdays versus Thursday. I mean, we started testing all those kinds of things, and you start to separate those ideas out and really understand when you're overwhelming people. The other thing is, as I mentioned, just ask. Just say, hey, listen, is this helping? Is this helping you to do that? Ann Handley, who's one of my heroes in terms of marketing, she says in email, the responses that you get from your email are more important than just about anything. Like who responds and what do they say? And it's easier for a smaller organization than a larger organization to look at that. But that context information, like, thank you so much, this was helpful. Oh my God, this is awful. Don't send me more of this, right? Those responses can be truly informative in terms of what you're doing. By the way, all those go into my sort of centralized tool for understanding context.
I feel like this can apply to more than just marketing.
Oh, you know what I mean? Yeah, well, exactly. Exactly. Yeah, I've learned that in my marriage too, right? I know when I'm overwhelming somebody with content, trust me. Yeah.
All right, next question we have, how do you recommend balancing the need for frequent marketing messages with managing cost in a small business?
Fantastic question. That goes all the way back to the beginning of the presentation, right, when we talked a little bit about reach and frequency. And that balance is really hard when you're starting to try to get to a place where you understand what the right balance is, right, how much frequency you need in order to reach. What I would suggest is that personalization and making content more personal, making the effort to measure twice and cut once. In other words, taking a slower approach to your marketing more generally so that each individual message becomes more important is decreasing. That naturally decreases the quantity of content you're going to create. But then you can start to understand, are you actually achieving your goals with that minimal amount, right? I used to answer the question, people would ask me all the time, they'd say, well, how much content should we be sending, right? Is one blog a day too much? Is one email a day too much? What's the right number? And my answer is there's no right number. And the way I used to answer that question is I used to say, create as much content that you can and have it all be excellent. And that's bad advice. And what I've now revised my answer to say, create the minimal amount of content to actually achieve the goal that you have. So assuming you have a very clear objective and a very clear goal, create the minimum amount of content that you, now that inherently means every message that we put out there is more important. So we put more care and feeding into it, trying to make it more personal so that it has the impact we desire. And so again, it comes back to trying things out, working through it, and really understanding where and when you're actually creating that impact versus when you're not creating that impact.
So it's like being more intentional.
100%.
Yeah.
That's generally the rule. And in a world of AI that we live in today, it's so important is being intentional with our content and putting that human face and that intentionality behind it and making it more personal, even if it takes us twice as long to do it.
Right.
Putting the importance in that message, that's the way to differentiate against the noise that's going on in our inboxes right now. Otherwise, you're just another email.
Yeah, that makes sense. So now to follow up on that, this person has asked, how do you determine the minimal amount of data needed to create personalized content?
That's a great question too. And basically, if you go through that process that I walked through, one of the keys is you need to first outline what's going to happen. Like what's going to happen that, in your various plays. So this is the understanding that, hey, if 4 people come in, I'm going to act like a big deal, and it's going to make a big, that's the play, right? If 2 people come in, the play is basically I'm going to put them in the back, and I'm going to put their favorite bottle of wine behind them, and that's going to be great, right? 2 plays, right? That's the only 2 plays. Now, the trigger for that, what are the triggers that I need to know for that? He only needs to know one piece of data there. The piece of data he needs to know is reservation for 2 or reservation for 4. Anything else he gets, explicit data or otherwise, just helps him develop the right specific play, right? In other words, what are the rules within that play? I see it's 4 and I see it's a business dinner. Well, That means I'm going to make a big deal and I'm going to put them here, but I'm not going to get the crayons out and the paper for the kids because I know there's no kids coming.
Right.
That kind of thing. So if you write out your plays that you want to have happen, then you can say, okay, great, here are the rules. That will define the elements of data that you need in order to execute those rules.
Amazing. These questions are so good, by the way, and I think we have time for one more question, Robert. The last question is, what are some common mistakes businesses make trying to create this personalized content?
I'll tell you the biggest one is the Mad Lib stuff. Right, which is because it's almost too easy to do these days with tools, like to say, ooh, throw in name field, throw in business field, throw in the economy field, throw in the industry field, throw in all these fields and make it personalized. And I can tell you, you all know how you feel when you get one of those emails, especially when things mess up and you get, hi, first name, right? You immediately lost all trust in that company, right? It's like, it's just, that's hashtag marketing fail. And so the biggest mistake is thinking that you have to parrot back data to people to make them feel like this is a more personalized message. You don't. In fact, you don't have to really personalize or put any data. First name, great. First name, last name, great, wonderful. If it fits into the context of the play that you want to run, wonderful. But be circumspect about that, because it doesn't, like, when you get content, what you want it to do is feel personal without looking. It's like great plumbing, right?
Right.
If I notice it, it's over.
Right. Absolutely brilliant. Absolutely brilliant. So those were some amazing points about the importance of personalization to stand out in a crowded market, and we give a big thank you to you, Robert. I know that was really interesting to me, and I hope you all found it just as useful. So let's all give one final virtual round of applause for our Day 2 keynote speaker, Robert Rose. Now, next up, a skills builder to highlight the power of SMS marketing and some of the great features Mailchimp has added. Last year, SMS was only available for customers in the United States, but we're happy to announce that it's now available in additional markets. So let's check in with Wade and Connor for the download on what makes SMS a great tool. Over to you guys.